There's a drought that comes through there. Appreciate all of you being here this morning, being a part of our Bible study period. Brother Don Carter, would you lead us in a word of prayer, please? Sorry that Miss Ruby is sick, and sorry that Chris is sick too. He called me last night, and I forgot to make this announcement. I meant to make this announcement, and I forgot it. Two, since I'm up here thinking. Barry Cook had a biopsy this past week, and he is to see his doctor tomorrow. Let's pray that the report will be good. And also, I found out a day or two ago that our answering machine at home was not working. And somebody doing dusting, we try to dust at least every 6 months. And we get it more often than that. But it evidently hit that, or I might have hit it in my sleep because it's real close to my side of the bed. But anyway, we hadn't got any messages for a couple or 3 days, and that's very unusual. So I checked it, and sure enough, Chris had left a message for me, and he told me last night when he called, and I didn't get it on Friday. So I think we've got it reset now. I called it on my cell phone. It's working. So we want you to call anytime you need to call us or whatever. But we, like all of you, get a lot of calls for insurance and whatever, and we don't answer those unless we know the number. But do leave us a message because we are out of the house quite a bit. We're studying in our class downstairs the book by that was written several years ago about studying sin seriously. And it's still being published. It looks like this. This is one of the Winkler books, and the young adult class studied this years and years ago, and I think Barbara and Ken Hensley and I were the only 3 people in the class that remembered it. But it's an excellent study, and I commend it to you. We can get you a copy of the book if you don't have it, but I think it's in the library downstairs. Our greatest enemy, we know, is Satan and sin. Satan is the instigator of sin. We have studied the origin of sin prior to Eden. Now, you may not have ever studied that or thought about it, but it's evident that rebellion against God existed prior to Eden. If not, well, where did Satan come from? Satan, obviously, is an angel that has fallen. We know the New Testament clearly establishes that angels have fallen. What does that indicate? It indicates they were created free moral agents too. They can serve God or they can rebel against God. Evidently, Satan is a fallen angel who rebelled against God because of his pride. And in pride, he was lifted up against God and opposed him. And so, when God created man, Satan had already become Satan. God didn't create the devil because he makes all things good. Everything that he made was said to be good in the book of Genesis. So we know that the devil was not created as the devil, but he became our adversary and the adversary of God, of course, because he opposes everything that is good. So there was a rebellion in heaven. Remember, Jesus said, I beheld Satan falling as lightning from heaven. He saw him cast out, as it were. And we see in the book of Genesis the beginning of sin And the originator of it, of course, was the devil. God didn't cause man to sin. Satan tempted him to sin. And man succumbed to that temptation. And we have talked about that already, how that that Satan approached Eve just at the right time. Satan, from his standpoint, tempts us in a timely manner. It's to his advantage. He tempted Jesus after Jesus had fasted for 40 days. And so he sought to come to him at his weakest time and say to him, if you're the Son of God, why don't you command these stones to be made bread and satisfy your hunger? That would have been a severe temptation, but Jesus refuted it by saying, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Father. And so it was each time that Satan tempted him, offered him yet more and more and more. And remember the three avenues of temptation: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. They were present in Genesis, the book of Genesis, and then they were present in Matthew 4. And we're told, there hath no temptation that is going to come upon you that is not common to men. We're still tempted today in those three basic ways. Sometimes it may just be one way involved, could be two, maybe all three at the same time. But every temptation falls into those three categories: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. 1 John 2, 15 through 17 tells us that. We've studied also that the way things happen in the Garden of Eden, and I think I've reiterated this before, even in this class on Sunday morning, that man heard a lie, believed a lie, and followed a lie. And that resulted in separation from God. So, conversely, the way back to God is to hear the truth, believe the truth, and obey the truth. We're separated from God by sin. Sin results from hearing a lie, believing a lie, and following a lie. The only way that we can come back to God is to hear the truth, believe the truth, and obey the truth. One of the things that stands out in the book of Genesis is that Eve sort of entered into a discussion with the devil. Have you ever thought about it from that standpoint? Just begin to have a conversation, and Satan will approach you very casually, as if he has your best interest at heart. And he will do everything within his power to make sin seem sensible. That's his desire. He appeals to those three areas: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life, to make sin seem to be the sensible thing to do. And you'll notice that his approach involved questioning the fairness of God. How many of you have heard, you don't have to raise your hands, how many of you have heard that statement? That's not fair. How many times do you hear that in the run of a week? Sometimes you hear it nearly every day. Children will say, that's just not fair. Or even, grown-ups will say, well, that just doesn't seem fair to me that this would happen to them and nothing goes on, but this happens to me, and boy, it just all comes crashing down. Well, I've told the kids at camp and kids in Bible classes that I've taught, you need to learn early on, life is not fair. It just isn't. Never has been. And it never will be as long as time lasts. Because it's just the nature of things. Sinful nature, yes, we know there's sin in the world, and the world is filled with it. And because of that, there's going to be all kinds of unfairness that takes place. But notice how Satan said, has God said? Now, did God really mean that? You sure you understood him right? And then he said to her, well, you know why God has withheld that from you, don't you? Because he doesn't want you to be like him. He's not being fair to you. You hear that a lot. You see that principle applied a lot in our world today, don't you? It's very, very common that people will blame God for things, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But Eve deleted some words. She left the word every out when she was conversing with Satan. And she added the words, touch it, to what God said. We're not to take away from what God has said, and we're not to add to what God has said. Revelation 22:18 and 19. We're not to add to His Word. That's not the only prohibition. God several times in His Word reiterated that principle. Don't add to it. Don't take from it. Just leave it as it is. And man, that's hard for people to do. Because we think we know better than God. Don.
We think sometimes we wonder how Satan works in things today. Well, I've seen a couple of those works myself, and you all might have too. I go to the fitness center, and there's a part-time lady that works there, and she's always telling somebody at the center, God told me to tell this.
Yeah.
God, and openly, God speaks to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know that God doesn't audibly speak to people and tell them what to do other than through His Word. So actually, that Satan has deceived her into thinking that God is speaking to her because everything she says is false doctrine.
Uh-huh.
And it's just like men who preach. They'll say, well, God put this in my heart or put it on my heart.
Laid it on my heart.
And then they preach false doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
No, Satan put that in their heart, not God. And that's the danger of religion. Somebody does it in the name of religion, they're actually putting out what Satan is telling them to say.
Right.
Because they're doing what they want. They say what they want to say instead of what God wants to say.
That's exactly right. Thus saith the Lord. It is written. Talked about that this morning. Any other comment? Why did man sin? Wasn't because of his ignorance, was it? Because God had told him exactly what would happen. You can read Genesis 3, verse 3, verses 1 through 3, and you will see that God told him, now here is what I want you to do, and here's what's going to happen if you do not do it. So God had spoken to man. Is God unfair? No. God tells us what He wants us to do. And you'll see that principle play out all through the Old Testament. When God gave the law to Israel, He told them what He wanted them to do, and He said, now, as long as you follow my will, here's what's going to happen to you. And they were all good things. He said, if you do not follow my will, here's what's going to happen to you. And they were all bad things. And that principle plays out all the way into the time of the judges, into the times of the kingdom, the united kingdom, the divided kingdom. God would speak to the children of Israel through His prophets and say, if you follow this path, here's what's going to happen to you. If you follow this path, here's what's going to happen to you. He has been eminently fair. He always tells us what He wants us to do and what we need to do. Well, if man didn't sin because of his ignorance, why did he sin? He wanted his freedom. He wanted to be free to do what felt right. what seemed okay. He wanted his freedom from divine restraint. And that is a very real problem in our world today. Don't tell me what that book says. I don't want to hear what that says. I've had people actually tell me that. Jackie? Right. Everybody needs to read the book of Jeremiah sometime. And all of us need to go back and reread that and be aware of some of the things that the prophets suffered. Then it'll help you appreciate Hebrews 11, especially that latter part that talks about nobody in particular, but all the prophets of God in general. Their names are not all given, but they suffered so much. Some of them were sewn asunder, and just all kinds of things happened to them. And the Hebrews writer said, of whom the world was not worthy. That is to say, the world didn't deserve them. They were such outstanding men of faith, that the world, because of its wickedness, did not deserve them. But God in His mercy sent them to tell these people what they needed to do. Men don't want divine restraint. They do not want to be told what God wants them to do. They don't want to feel like that they're under His control. This nature, this tendency is seen very clearly in the story of the prodigal son. Why did that young boy want to leave for? Why did he leave? I mean, he had about everything you could think of. His father loved him. The fact that he had that fatted calf and that he had servants and all of that, tells you that he was a pretty wealthy man. And the fact that he gave the boy the share of inheritance that was coming to him tells you he was a generous father. And you just think about that. Why did he want to leave? He wanted his freedom. For whatever reason, he's tired of being home. He wanted to get out from under his father's thumb, get away from home. I've said many times, I don't know, maybe his older brother took him out behind the barn and whipped him 3 or 4 times, and he decided he'd just leave, rather than put up with that. But we don't know all the things that were involved, but it was clearly that he did not like the restraint anymore, and so he left. But look at the pride of men's hearts and how that is involved in their sin. You've probably heard of the writer C.S. Lewis. He has some worthwhile things to say. I remember Brother Baxter recommended some of his books when we were in college. But he called pride the complete anti-God state of mind. Pride is anti-God. It's an attitude of heart or mind. Well, somebody might ask, well, why didn't God just create man incapable of sinning? You ever heard that one? I'm sorry? Love. Yeah. Why didn't He just make us where we couldn't sing? What would that have made us? Robots? Somebody that was just machined or they call it programmed a certain way. You can take those robots and you can make them do whatever you want to do. There's some of these guys now flying drones all over everywhere, taking pictures and so on. Need to be careful about that. But anyway, that would be really, it would not be, man wouldn't be man if he had not been given the ability to choose. Let's illustrate it this way. Why didn't God make water where it would not be capable of drowning a person? Wouldn't be water anymore, would it? It wouldn't cleanse dirt from your hand. Do you know water is called the universal solvent? Because it will cleanse and break down just about anything. Just about anything. It wouldn't satisfy your thirst. Water's an amazing thing. Why does water become lighter when it freezes? You ever thought about that?
It expands.
Yeah, it expands.
Less.
What if it started at the bottom of the river and froze upward? Flood the earth. Yeah. What about life? The life in the water. What would happen to it? All the fish would be encased in ice. All the marine life would be killed. Point is, God knows what He's doing. Simple as that. God knows what He is doing. And the fact that man was created with the ability to choose and with the possibility of doing both good or evil is positive proof of the fact that God did it exactly like it needs to be done. That's one of the greatest proofs that we're who we need to be. We don't need to be robots. We need to be people who have the opportunity to choose. He gave the angels evidently that same choice. They could choose to be those who glorify Him and are interested in some way or the other and involved in the whole process of salvation and making known His will. And I'll be honest with you, I don't understand everything that there is to know about angels. But I do know that the Bible talks about those that are good and those that are not. There are those that have sinned, that have been cast down, reserved in chains of darkness till the proper time. The demons asked the Lord on one occasion, "Are you come to torment us before the time?" The time of what? The time of their being destroyed and tormented. I mean, it's evident that they knew of their demise. They knew what was going to happen to them eternally. Remember, the lake of fire and brimstone prepared for whom? The devil and his angels. So the devil has angels. There are angels that follow him. There are angels that follow God and serve Him. And the Bible clearly shows what's going to happen. The fact that God did not interpose in this matter, and make man incapable of sinning is again the best evidence that that's what should have occurred. Because what God does is always best. Now, what about the results of man's sin? What does sin do to us? Well, if you go back and read Genesis 3 really closely, you'll find, number one, that sin results in guilt. Our conscience bothers us. We had a good lesson in Search of the Lord's Way this morning. Had a good lesson on the fact that the conscience of man can be trained. That was at least one of the points made. Can be trained to accept things that are not right. Some of you may remember my mentioning women in certain cultures. I believe it was some of the Hindu persuasion that would go out and take maybe it was their firstborn child, and throw it to the crocodiles because they believed that pleased the God that they serve. Now, how could a mother do that? Same way that some mothers today, kill their children. Because you've been trained, the conscience has been trained to believe that that's all right. Or it's the greater good, because the gods will be pleased. But the conscience, sometimes people will rationalize and convince themselves that a thing is all right when clearly it's not. James says that a man can be self-deceived. A man who, doesn't bridle his tongue, man's religion's going to be vain. He can deceive himself into believing it's all right. But guilt is something that is good in a sense, because it determines that, or shows that we do have a consciousness of right and wrong. And we know that fear comes from sin. One of the greatest fears is of being discovered. How do we know that? Adam and Eve hid themselves. They came to fear the coming of God into the garden instead of anticipating and looking forward to it. They hid themselves because they said, well, we know we're naked. Well, how did you know that? Have you eaten of that tree? Because God knew that was the only way they could know. Jackie? That's true. That's true. And going back a moment to the Old Testament, go back and read the book of Deuteronomy again. And notice how God warned the children of Israel. Now, when you come into the land and you start harvesting crops that you didn't plant and occupying houses and cities that you didn't build, be careful, lest you be lifted up in pride and you forget what God has done for you. That is indeed a real possibility, and let's not fall into that category. Guilt, fear, shame, death, separation, subjection to others, sorrow, and servile toil. You're going to live by the sweat of your face now. You're going to have to work really hard, because thorns and thistles are going to grow in your way. And if you've never seen them, come visit me on the farm sometime and I'll show some of them to you. And you can use a briar blade on them. We appreciate so much your being here this morning. Hope all of you have a good afternoon.